You're drifting now, slowly, gently into the valley of the Mexicar, the people you might know as the Aztecs. The year is somewhere in the early 1400s. The basin is high and quiet, surrounded by mountains like the walls of a great bowl. The sky above is bluer than blue. Below, water glints with lazy ripples, and far in the distance, the faint clinking of obsidian tools against stone echoes like a lullaby. You're standing at the edge of Lake Xochimilco, one of the last great remnants of the five-lake system that once covered the Valley of Mexico. But this isn't just any lake. This lake is alive with floating gardens. And it's here that you meet your first gardener, a man named Taltoni, whose name simply means he who tends the earth. Taltoni's job is not glamorous, but it's critical. His garden isn't a garden in the way you know it. It floats. It's called a chinampa, word you may have never heard, but which deserves your admiration. These artificial islands are crafted from mud dredged up from the lake bottom and woven with reeds, branches, and tree roots. Held in place by willows that are planted along the edges, these mats are turned into fertile rectangles of productivity, stacked with corn, beans, chilies, tomatoes, and flowers. They are, by all accounts, sustainable farming miracle every morning. Taltoni steps onto his canoe and paddles from his hut to his chinampa. The water is calm. His dog follows behind in a second canoe. Yes, the dog has his own canoe. The Aztecs were very practical about things like that. As Taltoni arrives at the garden, you notice something strange. He reaches into a little pouch at his belt and gently lifts something out. It's not a tool, not a seed, it's a snail. A small, living, slime-trailing snail. Why? Taltoni places the snail delicately on the moist soil right beside the base of a milpa plant. He repeats this with two others, then begins his work, pruning, inspecting, harvesting. You watch. The snails do what snails do. They roam slowly, trail glistening paths across the earth, and eat, but not just anything. Aztec gardeners were some of the earliest observers of what we now call biocontrol, using natural predators to manage pests. Snails, believe it or not, were sometimes used to help keep the tiny, soft-bodied insect invaders in check. While not as fast as birds or as dramatic as lizards, snails had one powerful advantage. They were always damp, always slow, and always hungry for organic muck. Of course, not every Aztec gardener used snails this way. Some used frogs, others preferred releasing tiny beetles. But snails were portable, easy to collect, and they lived in the lake right beside the chinampas. It was the ancient version of pocketing a helpful garden tool, a slimy one, but helpful. Nonetheless, Taltoni also valued his snails for something else: soil softness. You may not think a snail could help shape the earth, but those tiny inch trails constantly stirred the top layer of soil. Combined with regular watering and careful composting, these micro-churners helped prevent the hard crust that made roots suffocate. The Aztecs didn't write manuals about this, but they knew, they always knew. And while he works, hums a soft melody from his grandmother's garden, back when he was a boy, you're almost sure you can hear it too. A gentle hum over the reeds, a rhythm of patience, of time, of soil that his tools are simple. A digging stick, a gourd bowl, a woven basket. His uniform, a cloth wrap and wide-brimmed hat, woven from palm fibers. Yet his knowledge, passed down through generations, is more complex than it seems. He knows that you must plant corn with beans and squash, so the beans climb the corn stalks, and the squash leaves shade the soil from the sun. He knows that if his canoe leaks, he can patch it with lake mud and tree resin. He knows that if the water level rises, he must raise the garden's edges with new layers of sediment. He knows the smell of bad compost, the feel of fertile mud, the way frogs disappear before a dry season. Teltony is not a great man in the history books. He will never be carved in stone or written into epic poetry, but it is his labor, repeated daily, slowly, silently, that feeds entire families. And then it begins to rain, not a storm, just a soft curtain of droplets, like silk unraveling. From the sky, Teltony doesn't run for cover. He tips his face up. Rain is welcome. Rain is needed. You, too, let it fall on your face. And for a moment, you feel what it's like to be rooted in mud, in silence, in routine. It's peaceful, it's boring, but deeply good. Back in the pouch at his hip, a fourth snail wiggles out slightly, then retracts. The rain is making them bold, and you wonder if something as small as a snail can quietly shape a floating island. Other tiny lives once kept entire civilizations afloat. The rain has passed. The chinampa smells of wet earth, lake water, and crushed herbs. The air is still, heavy with the scent of life renewing itself. You sit beside Teltony as he prepares a basket of harvested amaranth, a grain favored not just for its nutritional power, but because the gods were said to enjoy its flavor when shaped into ceremonial dough across the water. More gardeners paddle slowly, their canoes barely disturbing the surface. Children fish with lines of cactus fiber, and a grandmother in the distance throws cornmeal into the lake, not as bait, but as an offering. The lake, in this moment, feels sacred. But to the Aztecs, it always was. Teltony wipes his hands on his tunic and looks down at the soil. He presses a finger into it and mutters something about warmth. This is the kind of day, he says, when the snails breed. Aztec gardeners didn't raise snails in the way you might raise chickens or pigs. There were no pens or feeders. Instead, they created conditions, moisture, shade, soft soil that encouraged snails to live among the roots and mulch. The snails were free to come and go, and yet many of them stayed, whether out of instinct, comfort, or the simple availability of food. These tiny gastropods became accidental residents of the chinampas. Some were even considered helpful enough to be carried from one garden to another. Not every chinampa was created equal. Some had denser soil, others were closer to freshwater inflows. When one garden was lacking in the soft microlife that enriched the topsoil, a gardener might pocket a few snails and help nature along. There were even rituals, simple ones, performed before bringing snails to a new bed. A sprinkle of flour, petals, a pinch of ground chili, a circle traced in the mud. These weren't grand ceremonies, but practical acknowledgments that even the smallest creatures played a role in the balance of the world. The Aztecs believed the earth was alive, not metaphorically, literally. The soil was a layer atop the body of the goddess Tlotecutli, the devouring earth. Every root that pushed into the ground disturbed her sleep. Every seed that grew, every plant that fed a village, was part of a cycle that involved gods, creatures, humans, and even snails. Teltony lifts a snail and holds it up to you. Its shell is not just brown. It's streaked with gold, ringed with dark spirals, and glistening with moisture. Its body extends slowly, one feeler twitching in your direction. It's fragile, yes, but purposeful. And the snails aren't alone. You Notice beetles moving under leaves, tiny worms near the compost heap, and frogs croaking from a nearby rock. The chinampa is a quiet universe, layered with life upon life. Everything feeds something. Everything has a place. Even weeds are not always removed. Certain ground covers were allowed to stay because they kept the soil moist or discouraged more invasive species. It's not about controlling the land. It's about listening to it. And yet, balance was never guaranteed. Some years, too much rain would rot the roots. Other times, a dry season would crack the mud. Tiltony remembers when his father had to rebuild half a chinampa after a storm washed away the bank. That took weeks of dredging lake muck and hauling reeds from miles away. He tells you this without bitterness. It's just part of the work. He shows you the compost pit, layers of water, weeds, fish bones, crushed shells, and rotting fruit. The smell is sharp, but not unpleasant. He tells you that good compost sings. You don't hear it with your ears. You smell it with your nose, feel it under your fingers. It gives back what the soil has lost. And yes, he says again, snails help. With that too, their waste is gentle. Their paths break surface tension. Their presence means things are stable. If the snails disappear, it's a warning. Something is wrong with the water, or the plants, or the balance. He doesn't own this garden. Not really. The chinampas are part of the kalpuli, the community unit. Each family works a few. The harvest is shared, divided, stored, and offered. During feast days, the best ears of corn and freshest chilies are given to the temples. Tiltony doesn't resent this. He believes in it. He tells you that when his grandmother died, her ashes were placed beneath the roots of a small fig tree on their oldest chinampa. That tree still grows, quietly, in the corner of the garden. The soil beneath it is thick with worms and mushrooms. The snails seem to prefer it. You begin to understand how the Aztecs viewed time not as a line, but as a circle. Seasons return, crops regrow. The snails leave and come back. People are born, live, tend the earth, and return to it in the distance. A temple bell sounds. It's time for the midday meal. Tiltony gathers his tools, brushes off the soil from his hands, and lifts the basket onto his shoulder. The snails remain on the garden bed. They've done their part. Tonight, when the work is done, he will return them to the lake, gently, like placing coins back into a jar. You ask yourself something. If the smallest hands can shape the most fertile earth, and if the quietest creatures can restore balance to a garden, what else might history have forgotten to honor? The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the lake. The water reflects the golden haze of the sky, and the chinampas glow softly under the light, like floating ribbons of green and brown. Tiltony paddles back across the narrow canal, his arms moving in rhythm with the water. The basket at his feet is now empty. The day's harvest is done, but the garden is never finished. As you float with him, you begin to think about the larger picture. Not just the snail in the pocket, but the empire behind the chinampa. The Aztec Empire, known to its people as the Triple Alliance, was a complex machine, a network of tribute, ceremony, conquest, and cosmology. But for all its grand warriors and divine rulers, it was held together by people like Tiltony. The emperor did not feed the people. The gods did not till the soil. It was the gardeners who made the empire thrive, one chinampa at a time. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, they were stunned by what they saw. Floating gardens stretched across the lake like a vast green city. The water was clean. The air smelled of herbs and earth. The canals were lined with willows. The system was more efficient than anything they had seen in Europe. Hernan Kortz himself wrote about it, comparing the city of Tenochtitlan and its surrounding lakes to Venice. But even more impressive than the temples and marketplaces were the chinampas. The Spanish had never imagined that land could be built on water, or that snails could be farmhands. They did not understand the science, or the soul. In the years that followed the conquest, much of the Aztec world was dismantled. Temples were torn down, codices burned, priests silenced. The great city was renamed Mexico City, but the chinampas, strangely, remained dot. Why? Because they worked. Even the conquerors had to eat, and they quickly realized that the chinampa system was far more productive than any European method of the time, so they kept the gardens. Or rather, they allowed the gardeners to keep tending them. Teltoni's grandchildren continued his work. So did their children. For generations, long after the empire's collapse, the chinampa system survived. The snails kept returning. The soil stayed soft. The balance held. You might imagine that eventually the snails were forgotten, but they weren't. In modern times, biologists and agricultural historians have studied the old chinampa systems, trying to understand their success. What they found surprised them. Snail populations around active chinampas were healthier than those in surrounding wetlands. Their presence helped manage soil bacteria, reduce algae bloom, and encourage plant strength. Without any modern chemicals, ancient Aztec gardeners had maintained ecosystems with a precision that still stuns scientists today. Even now, in southern Mexico City, in the borough of Xochimilco, some chinampas still survive. A few are used for tourism, but others are still active, worked by families descended from those same lake gardeners. They grow flowers, herbs, maize, chilies, and yes, if you ask the right person, you'll find that some still carry a few snails in their pockets. Not for luck, not for nostalgia, for the same reason Teltoni did, because they listened to the soil, because the rhythm of a snail's trail as it moves across the earth says something about the state of the garden. It's a language older than empire, older than writing, a conversation between earth and life. As the stars begin to appear above the lake, the night frogs begin their song. Teltoni's canoe is moored for the night. His home is simpler. Thatched roof, a cooking fire, a gourd of water beside his bed. He lays out his tools for the next day. He washes his hands in the lake, and then he does one last thing. He picks up each snail from the garden bed and returns it to the edge of the water. The creatures wiggle, disappear beneath the reeds, and find shelter for the night. You watch, quietly, wondering how many generations have performed this exact act, how many hands, over the centuries, have repeated this small kindness, not because history demanded it, but because the garden did. Snails, after all, are not remembered in most histories. They do not appear in battle scenes or royal chronicles. But here, in the mud and the stillness, they are something else. A sign of care, a symbol of patience, a keeper of balance. And perhaps that's the lesson, that sometimes the most enduring parts of a civilization are not the monuments it builds, but the small, steady rituals of the people who refuse to let the land die. You close your eyes and breathe in the night air. You can still smell the soil. You can still feel the quiet. And you wonder if the gardeners have survived. If the snails still trail across the chinampa beds, What other fragments of forgotten empires might still be whispering under our feet? Chapter 2. The mysterious case of ancient Korean floor heaters. You wake before the sun, surrounded by silence. There is snow outside, lightly dusting the pines that crowd the foothills. The mountains rise in folds, grey-blue and still. Your breath fogs gently in the air, but your feet are warm. The floor beneath you isn't made of carpet or planks. It's packed clay, smooth and reddish, and it hums faintly with heat. You press your palm to it, surprised. There are no stoves nearby, no open fires, no obvious source of the warmth that seeps into your bones. You are in the heart of an old Korean village, somewhere near the 3rd century BCE. The morning is cold, the wind is unforgiving, but this house, like many others in the ancient Korean peninsula, holds a secret beneath its floor. The ondol. Ondol means warm stone, and it's not just a name. It's one of the earliest and most ingenious heating systems in the world. This village lies in the territory once ruled by the kingdoms of Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. You are in the land of pine forests, steep valleys, and stone-lined roads. It is a place where winter lingers for months, and snow piles up against doorways. In such a place, fire is not just comfort, it is survival. But fire also brings smoke, and smoke brings problems. In other parts of the world, smoke escaped through holes in the ceiling, or it filled the room, choking the air. But here, the ancient engineers found another way. You follow the trail of a woman named Yeonhwa, who is preparing the morning fire. She squats low beside a clay stove in the corner of her kitchen. It looks simple, just an open hearth where millet porridge simmers in a pot. But as you watch, you realize that this stove connects to more than just cooking. The fire beneath her pot sends heat not into the room, but into a long, horizontal fluid tunnel built under the house floor. The flames, smoke, and heat travel under the floor, winding through stone-lined channels before exiting through a chimney at the far end of the house. This journey is not accidental. It is deliberate by the time the smoke reaches the outside. Most of the heat has already been absorbed by the thick stone and packed clay under the floor. The floor, now warm, radiates that heat gently and evenly. Upward, no fuel wasted. No room filled with soot, just hours of slow, comforting warmth. And you feel it again under your toes, across your legs. The heat is soft, not hot. It's not like sitting near a fire. It's like being hugged by the earth. Yeonhwa's children sleep nearby, wrapped in quilts, their heads cold but their bodies relaxed. They do not cough from smoke. They do not stir from chill. They have lived with ondol their whole lives. As the fire dies down, Yeonhwa pours out a ladle of porridge and sets it on the floor to cool. But it doesn't cool quickly. The floor keeps it warm. This ondol system isn't new, even in your time. Archaeological evidence shows it may have existed for over 2,000 years, developed not by emperors or scholars, but by rural builders who understood their environment. Stones held heat. Smoke traveled. Chimneys pulled. Floors could do more than hold weight. In those early days, the systems were simple, just one fire and one flue. But over time, they grew more sophisticated. Multiple rooms could be connected. Chimneys could be adjusted to control draft and temperature. Floors could be built in layers to distribute heat evenly, and the people adapted their lives around the system. They sat on the floor to eat, to work, to sleep. Furniture was low or non-existent. Beds were just folded blankets. The entire home became a heat-retaining shell, where warmth came from below, not from flame. You begin to notice other details. The clay used to build the floor is mixed with straw and ash. This blend prevents cracking and insulates better than plain earth. The flue tunnels are sloped slightly to help the smoke move, but not too fast. Speed loses heat. Slow flow keeps it. The chimney is short and narrow, not the tall brick towers of the West, but a squat outlet just beyond the main wall. It's capped with stone, not to block the smoke, but to keep out the rain. Everything has been thought through. Even meals are timed with heating. Breakfast is cooked when the floor is coldest. Dinner is prepared in the early evening to recharge the warmth overnight. You realize the ondel is not a machine, but a rhythm. A cycle of fire and stone, of cooking and sleeping. Yonwa's husband returns from the hills, arms filled with firewood. He stores it in a clay alcove near the stove. The wood is dry. Pine, mostly, with its sharp smell. It burns fast but hot, just right for morning heat. He checks the flue by lifting a smooth stone plug. A trickle of smoke escapes, but most of it flows properly to the chimney. No clog, no worry. You ask yourself something. How did people in other parts of the world sleep through cold nights without this? How did they survive damp, drafty castles or mud huts with smoky pits? How many children froze while these Korean homes remained quietly warm? The ondel didn't spread widely beyond the peninsula. Its success depended on local materials and specific building methods. But within Korea, it became a defining feature of life. Even Korean language reflects it. To say someone has died, one old phrase goes, "His spot on the ondel is now cold." Not the bed, not the house, the spot. The warm place where life happened. You glance again at your hands on the floor. The heat is still rising, and beneath it, stone still holds the memory of fire, and you wonder if warmth could be stored in silence. In the earth itself, what other ancient comforts have we forgotten in the rush toward modernity? The day grows colder. Thin wind moves between the trees, brushing frost onto the eaves of the house. But inside, the air remains calm. The floor still hums with residual warmth. No smoke, no firelight. Just a slow and steady comfort that seems to rise from the earth itself. Yonwa has gone to the village well. Her children have woken, rubbed their eyes, and padded across the floor with bare feet. No shivers, no rush for coats. The ondel has done its work. You follow her husband, named Chisu, as he crouches beside the firebox again. Not to light a new flame, but to inspect the ashes. The morning fire is now black dust. Chisu uses a carved wooden scoop to clear the flue. He hums to himself, careful to keep the ash from drifting. Even this task has a rhythm. Ash is saved. It will be mixed with clay to repair small cracks in the floor. Nothing is wasted. Waste is weakness. Every home is a closed system, balanced, like a pot on a flame. Outside, 2 other men haul long planks of pine. Toward another house, you walk with them, watching as they prepare to rebuild a collapsed flue. It happens sometimes. Heavy snow, improper venting, or earth movement can cause the narrow tunnels to shift. Repair is not easy, but it is familiar. These systems have been tended for generations. As they dig, you see the layers beneath the home. The first is a stone trench, running flat and low beneath what will become the floor. Next comes a lattice of flat rocks, carefully arranged to leave narrow passages for air and smoke. Then a mix of mud, clay, straw, and ash pattered down in wide slabs, each layer drying slowly before the next is added. It can take days to build a single room, but when it is finished, the floor becomes one continuous body. No loose tiles, no floating boards, just stone warmed by flame, hidden beneath your feet. Chisu explains something with his hands. The angle of the tunnel, the way heat behaves. If the fire burns too fast, it escapes too quickly. If it burns too slow, the smoke thickens and backs up. The goal is balance. Everything depends on air. You begin to realize that ondol is not just about warmth. It is about control. Airflow, draft, fuel, clay, consistency. Wall thickness all must work together. The system is responsive. If you cook rice in the morning, your room is warm by noon. If you boil fish soup for dinner, the floor stays hot until midnight. But what about summer? Chisu smiles and leads you to the side of the house. There, under a smooth stone slab, is the chimney cap. In warmer seasons, they seal the flue. The ondol lies dormant. Meals are cooked outside. The floor cools to the touch. The house becomes quiet and shaded. Seasonal adaptation is woven into the structure. There is no need for external machines, no separate heater or fan. The house is its own climate. As the village carries on, a woman named Yunsak invites you into her home. She is older than Yanwa, with a voice like polished wood. Her ondol is newer, rebuilt last autumn after an early frost cracked the foundation. She shows you where the patch was made. You can barely see it. The clay is slightly darker, but the heat spreads evenly. Eun Suk places a basket of fermented radish on the floor to warm, not to cook, just to soften the chill. She tells you that her mother used to dry herbs along the edges of the ondol during winter. If placed right, the herbs wouldn't scorch. They would dry slowly, preserving flavor. She chuckles, remembering how as a child she once burned her finger trying to test a batch of ginger too soon. The ondol has its moods. You notice something else as you sit in Yunsek's room. The heat is not identical in every corner. Some places are warmer, others are cooler. This is by design. The family knows where to sit for sewing, where to nap, where to store food that must stay cool but not cold. The floor is a map, and they read it like farmers read the land. Even the architecture serves the system. Houses are built low and compact, with few partitions. Heat travels best through open spaces. Doors are short, ceilings are low. Furniture is light and movable. If a cold wind comes, they can seal the main room with mats in minutes. Back outside, Chisu and the other men have finished repairing the damaged flue. They test it with a small bundle of dry twigs. Smoke moves as it should, then faster, then gone. The floor above will feel warmer by sunset. They don't celebrate. This is normal. Just another part of living. You begin to see the deeper story. This isn't just about ancient heating. It's about a society that learned to work with nature rather than against it. The ondol didn't require forests to be leveled or great chimneys to rise. It didn't produce clouds of soot or burn through tons of fuel. It respected the cycle fire, stone, rest, repair. Even today, modern Korean architecture echoes the ondol. Heated floors are common in apartments, schools, and clinics. Gas or electric systems now replace wood fire, but the principle remains. Heat should rise from the ground, gently, evenly, invisibly. You sit once more near the hearth as dusk creeps. In Chisu lights another fire. Yanhua prepares dinner. The smoke moves beneath the floor. The clay begins to warm, and you wonder if the secret to survival was always underfoot. How many other answers have we buried just beneath the surface? Night arrives quietly. The village slows. Smoke no longer rises from chimneys. The fires have done their work, and the homes are still warm. You sit once more beside Yanhuai's family, wrapped in blankets atop the clay floor. The children drift into sleep. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, powdering the roofs with a silent rhythm. This moment, with warm feet and still air, is the product of generations of quiet invention. The orndl was not patented. It was never owned by a king. It wasn't exported with fanfare, but its design endured. As centuries passed, the kingdoms of Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla merged, rose and fell. Buddhist temples rose beside hilltops. Metalwork improved. Literacy spread. Palaces were built in Jeongju and later in Seoul. And through it all, the orndl remained underfoot. Royal palaces had them. Scholar houses had them. Even military camps found ways to rig crude versions during long winters. The design was passed down not through schools, but through hands-on experience. A father would teach a son to slope a flue just right. A grandmother would explain which clay cracked less. Under fire, the floor, warm and solid, became a part of the culture. And yet, the world outside changed. The Joseon dynasty introduced new technologies from China and later from Europe. But even as chimneys rose and glass windows appeared, Koreans held fast to the heated floor. In the West, homes filled with fireplaces, drafty windows, and tall furniture. In Korea, life stayed low, simple, efficient. In the 20th century, war swept the peninsula. Bombs fell, villages were destroyed, families fled. And yet, in the homes that survived, the orndl still did its work. There are stories of soldiers, both foreign and local, who arrived in small towns expecting huts and smoke, and instead found floor-heated rooms with quiet, dry warmth. By the 1960s, with the rise of gas and electricity, engineers began to replace wood-fired flues with metal pipes and electric coils. The floor was now made of polished concrete or tile instead of clay, but the principles stayed the same. Heat from below, silent, even invisible. These new systems became known as modern orndl or pyeonhon, orndl comfortable orndl. Unlike the old methods, they could be controlled with thermostats. No firewood, no smoke, no ash. But for many older Koreans, something felt missing. They missed the smell of pine smoke in the morning, the crackle of a flame under the porridge pot, the quiet labor of feeding the floor. Still, the legacy endured today. If you visit a Korean home, rural or urban, you'll find the floor warm in winter. You'll be asked to take off your shoes. You'll be offered a cushion on the ground, not a sofa. You'll notice that children play on the floor. Grandparents nap there. Meals are taken cross-legged around low tables. The orndl is more than heating. It is the foundation of posture, of furniture, of rhythm. Even Korean architecture reflects it. Homes are designed with low ceilings and compact rooms to conserve warmth. School children learn about the old methods in books. Architects include radiant heating systems in their designs. The floor still matters, and far beyond Korea, designers have taken notice. In modern Scandinavia, underfloor heating is increasingly popular. In Japan, radiant systems appear in newer apartments. Even in North America, Eco-conscious builders are promoting radiant heating as a more efficient, quieter method than forced air. Yet few realize that this technology, praised today as modern and sleek, has its roots in a small Korean village where a woman named Yeonwa once boiled millet over a clay stove. You return now, one last time, to that village. The fire is out. The ash is swept. The children sleep in rows like seedlings. The floor is still warm. It will stay that way for hours. Suk, the elder woman, places her hands flat on the clay and says softly, "This is how we survived. This floor, this fire. Not swords or kings or gold, just the fire beneath our feet." You step outside into the cold night air. The wind has picked up, but your body still carries the warmth from the ondel. In the silence, you understand something. This ancient invention was not born of conquest or genius. It was born of observation, of care, of knowing that the ground we walk on could also be a shelter. That fire, if guided gently, could protect without noise or danger. You walk through the snow now, warmed from within, and you ask yourself if comfort can be built into the bones of a home. Not with wealth, but with wisdom. What else might our ancestors have quietly known that we've yet to remember? Chapter 3. How Phoenician sailors named half the Mediterranean. You stand at the edge of a sunlit shore. The sea before you is calm, its waves lapping gently against a wooden hull. The breeze carries the scent of salt, resin, and dry herbs. Behind you, the hills are dotted with low stone buildings and olive trees. But in front of you lies the vast unknown, the endless blue of the Mediterranean. This is the eastern coast. Near the city of Tyre, around 900 BCE, the people here call themselves Canaanites, but you may know them by another name, Phoenicians. They are not an empire. They do not build pyramids or march in legions. They do not write great histories of their kings. Instead, they build ships, fast, light, narrow ships with curved prows and bright painted eyes that watch the sea. The Phoenicians are sailors, traders, whisperers to the waves, and they leave behind something strange. Not monuments, not armies, but names you cannot walk. The shores of the ancient Mediterranean without tripping over the footprints of Phoenician words. City names, harbor names, river names. Even the word Europe may carry hints of Phoenician sounds. They did not seek to dominate. They simply moved. And in moving, they named Dot. You are here now with a man named Hannibal. He is preparing his galley for a journey westward, toward the distant lands of Cyprus, Malta, Sicily, and beyond. His ship is small, no more than 20 oars and a square sail, but it is enough. On board, there are bundles of dyed linen, jars of olive oil, pouches of dried dates, and blocks of cedar wood. Phoenicia's most precious cargo. But more important than goods is the logbook etched into Hannibal's mind. He knows every inlet, every hidden reef, every coastal village where a word has been traded for another, where a Phoenician sound has slipped into the tongues of strangers. He speaks 6 languages poorly and 1 language well. The language of trade. You ask how it works. He shows you as the ship pushes off from the shore. He speaks to the sea as if it were alive. Every sailor here does. The water is called yam, a word that survives in fragments across ancient Semitic languages. The Western Sea is sometimes Yam, Haggadol, the Great Sea. The name is not flashy. It simply states the truth. That's the Phoenician way. They named the island of Kaptora. The Greeks would later call it Crete. They called one bustling port Kartkadact, meaning new city. The Romans would rename it Carthage. Even the name Cadiz, the ancient Gadar, means simply the walled place. Simple names, lasting names. Phoenician names are like seeds scattered across the coastlines. You find them in southern Spain, along the Moroccan shore, in Sardinia, in Tunisia, even near the Canary Islands. Some were translated, others were kept, but all bear the quiet imprint of Phoenician sailors who once sold purple cloth and cedar planks in exchange for silver, salt, and stories. Back on the ship, Hannibal ties down a basket of glass beads. His people are known for glass, and for a particular Deuterian purple, made from the crushed glands of sea snails. It takes thousands of snails to produce even a small vial of pigment, and the process smells horrible. But the color, deep, rich, and nearly indestructible, was prized by kings and priests across the Mediterranean. That's how the Phoenicians earned their Greek name, Phoenike, meaning land of purple. A color became a label became history. The ship glides past rocky shores. A small cove appears, unnamed on most maps. But Hannibal has a name for it. Betruoc, House of Wind. It is where they once waited out a storm for 3 days. The name stuck. This too is how Phoenician names spread. Not from conquest, from use, from memory, from habit. A trader stops, gives a place a name. The next trader uses it, and soon the locals adopt it too. And so the sea fills with whispered labels, not shouted, not carved in stone, just passed along like a recipe or a melody. As the day passes, Hannibal speaks of Byblus, a city older than Tyre, where papyrus shipments once flowed in steady rhythm. The Greeks named their books Biblioi after it. The Bible, centuries later, would carry the name of that city, one of the many subtle legacies of Phoenician trade. He speaks of Cyprus, where copper flowed into the hands of merchants. The island's name may come from Kupros, one of the words for copper, another trace of the Phoenician tongue. You sit at the bow of the ship, rocking gently with the waves, and listen to the stories. None are written down. The Phoenicians wrote little. Their alphabet was simple 22 letters, all consonants, carved on pottery shards and stone slabs. But that alphabet, adopted by Greeks, Etruscans, and Romans, would later shape the alphabets of Europe and beyond. The letters on your screen, the ones you're reading right now, are descendants of Phoenician signs once etched by merchants like Hannibal. You begin to understand. The Phoenicians did not build empires of land. They built empires of memory. They moved quietly along the edges of other people's worlds, trading, naming, and leaving behind sounds that would echo for millennia. The ship docks at a small fishing village. Locals emerge. They don't speak Phoenician, but they greet Hannibal with a word he knows, one of his own. A word left behind by sailors 2 generations earlier. The name of the village sounds familiar, and you wonder, if the waves could speak, how many names would they remember that we have long since forgotten? The village smells of fish and smoke. Boats are pulled up on the sand, nets are drying in the breeze, and the children call out words you don't understand except one, a name, a Phoenician word, twisted by time but still alive. Hannibal smiles. He recognizes it. He doesn't correct them. That's not his way. Instead, he speaks gently, trades a jar of honey for a pouch of dates, and listens. This is how it always happens. Quiet contact, exchange without conquest. The Phoenicians do not bring armies. They bring amphorae, tools, cloth, stories, and names. You sit by the fire as he tells you about the invisible sea routes. The Mediterranean is not as large as the open oceans, but it's filled with reefs, shallows, storms, and rival harbors. A sailor must know when to hug the shore and when to sail into open water. He must read the stars, the seabirds, the color of the waves. There are no official maps, no standard names, so sailors make their own. A cove where a ship once wrecked is called Shalim, meaning questions. A cliff that echoes in wind becomes Zult whistle. These names are passed from mouth to mouth, not from scroll to scroll. The Phoenicians weren't the only ones to do this. Greeks, Egyptians, and Etruscans had their own place names. But Phoenicians moved the most. They carried more names farther, letting their words settle like dust in corners of the world. Hannibal's ship sails again, this time toward a rocky island known for its fierce goats and thin freshwater spring. He calls it Aenge's Goat's Eye. The locals call it something else. The Greeks call it yet another name. But among sailors, the Phoenician name sticks. That is the power of trade, of routine. The Greeks may send soldiers once a year. The Phoenicians come every season. Their names linger as the journey continues. You meet other sailors. A man from Arwad, who names clouds after his daughter's moods. A woman from Sidon, who carries a bone flute and claims it can summon favorable wind. A boy, barely 12, who remembers every shallow along the African coast by counting pebbles in his pocket. They all carry names. Some are invented on the spot. Others are as old as their grandparents' grandparents. You land at a harbor marked with carved stones. The inscription is Phoenician, simple and firm. 22 characters etched deeply into basalt. It says, "Peace to those who trade here. Fair weight, fair words." Beneath it, another set of marks in Greek. Someone has copied the message. The Phoenicians never built a lasting capital city outside their homeland. But their words built cities anyway. Carthage, born as Cart-Godact, the new city, becomes the jewel of the Western Mediterranean. Its name, language, and alphabet are all Phoenician in origin. Its merchants sailed to Iberia and beyond, leaving words in their wake. Even in Sardinia, a place far from Tyre or Sidon, archaeologists have found Phoenician inscriptions naming gods, hills, and rivers. These weren't declarations of power. They were notes, labels, clues for future traders. You begin to understand the difference between written conquest and spoken survival. Empires fall when armies retreat, but language seeps into the cracks of other cultures. It stays when borders change. That's why the alphabet matters so much. The Phoenicians didn't invent writing, but they simplified it. Cuneiform was complex. Hieroglyphs were sacred. The Phoenicians created an everyday script, just 22 letters. All consonants, all meant to be scratched quickly, memorized easily, spoken aloud. It was the alphabet of merchants, not monarchs. The Greeks adopted it and added vowels. The Etruscans took it next. Then the Romans, and now you, reading this, are using their great-grandchildren. A, B, C. Phoenician writing never tried to be beautiful, it tried to be useful. Legible on clay, stone, or wood. Carried in the minds of sailors. Carved into warehouse walls. You begin to imagine how many Phoenician names were never recorded. How many died out when traders vanished, when tongues changed, when conquests swept through. But some remain. Malta may come from the Phoenician word malith, meaning refuge. Tunis from Tynes, a Phoenician settlement. Tangier, possibly from Tingis, a name wrapped in old sailors' tales. Even the name Britannia was first recorded by Carthaginians, distant heirs of Tyre. The words survive quietly dot as night falls on the ship. Hannibal burns a pinch of cedar at the prow. Not a sacrifice, a tradition. The smell drifts into the wind, familiar and rich. It is the scent of Phoenicia carried westward. He speaks again, softly. This harbor has a name, that island a different one. You try to remember them all, but they are too many, and yet you realize that is the point. Phoenician history was never written in volumes. It was spoken, traded, repeated, a floating tongue, a living map of the sea. And you wonder if every name on every coastline once came from a single whispered word in a sailor's mouth. How much of our world has been shaped not by kings, but by quiet hands passing names from one harbor to the next. The wind is light this morning. The sea reflects the soft silver of dawn, and Hannibal's ship drifts slowly along the coast of an island he calls Ashtoreth's Spine. There is no record of that name on any modern map, but it lives in the memory of sailors who passed the story down, generation to generation. The island looks like a sleeping woman when seen from the west, her back curved and her arms folded. Phoenician names are like that, sometimes poetic, sometimes blunt, but always remembered by the people who needed them most. You sit beside the mast, watching the shoreline slip by. There are no boundaries here, no fences, no national lines, but Hannibal sees the divisions clearly. He points to a cove and calls it Eshbal-es Rest, where a trader once escaped a storm by beaching his ship. He gestures toward a jagged outcrop known as Dog's Teeth. Each name has a story, and each story is a way of remembering the sea. In this world, the map is not drawn on parchment. It is carried in the mind. You ask him how he remembers so many names. He shrugs and taps his temple. Same way I remember debts. You forget one, you suffer for it. Later, at a coastal market, he shows you how the names persist. A seller of olive oil uses the term ballam for cargo. It's an old word, Phoenician in root. A child refers to a bay as Motta, an echo of Mo, the Phoenician god of death and silence. A fisherman shouts Sapin, watch out, derived from sapina, to look or observe. None of them call themselves Phoenician. That word is long gone. But the language lingers, not as grammar, not as poetry, as fragments, tools, labels. The alphabet, meanwhile, spreads farther. A tablet found in an ancient Sardinian temple bears Phoenician letters, another in Morocco, another deep in southern Spain. Each one carries a name, a transaction, a prayer. You realize these tablets are not monuments, they are footprints. Traders left them where they worked, where they lived. Even Carthage, the grand city founded by settlers from Tyre, uses the old language long after the mother cities are forgotten. Carthaginian generals give their children Phoenician names. Their contracts are written in modified Phoenician script, even when war comes with Rome. With Greece, they hold onto the words. You see how language outlives borders. One day, Hannibal's ship is joined by another, larger vessel from Gadar, what you now know as Cadiz. The two crews share wine and salted fish. They swap news of distant markets. They do not speak the same dialect, but they understand one another. The words for wind, sail, cargo, and coast are shared. The names of ports are known. The map is still intact. You hear about new names being born. A port called Zarka, for its clear water. A cliff called Adon's Grasp, where a shipwreck was survived by only one. A shoal known as the Silent. These names may never be written in a book, but they live in the logbooks of minds, and yet time moves forward. The Greeks rise, the Romans expand, Phoenician trade fades, Carthage is destroyed, the old harbors fall silent, but the names survive. You look at a modern map of the Mediterranean. You see Malta, Cadiz, Tyre, Tunis. You hear echoes in words like Europe, alphabet, Bible, Hebrew, even Spain. All touched, in some way, by sailors who never called themselves founders. Just traders back on the ship. Hannibal tells one last story. He speaks of a headland where, in his youth, he carved his name into a rock. Years later, when he returned, the carving was gone washed away by wind and sea, but the name he gave it remained. Other sailors called it the same dot. His voice is calm, not proud, just certain. Stone forgets, but the sea remembers. And you understand, this story is not about a people who conquered. It is about a people who traveled, who adapted, who left behind a map made not of lines, but of words. A map, carried in conversation, in habit, in the mouth of one sailor passing news to another. As the coast fades into mist, you close your eyes, you feel the motion of the waves, you remember the names, and you ask yourself, if history is written by the powerful, but carried by the quiet, how many other legacies live beneath our language, hidden in plain sight? Chapter 4. When Roman senators argued about lettuce, the Roman Senate chamber is not quite what you expected. The air is heavy, but not with the drama of conspiracies or the tension of political rivalry. Instead, it smells faintly of vinegar, wilted greens, and the sweat of too many men in wool tunics debating a vegetable dot. You are in Rome, around 100 BCE. The marble pillars are tall, the sandals are dusty, and the topic on today's docket is lettuce, not conquest, not taxation. Lettuce dot at first, you assume it's a joke. A senator rises and demands more government oversight of public gardens. Another follows, arguing that the price of lettuce has dropped too low for proper profit. A third claims that foreign varieties from Egypt are softening Roman discipline. Someone even accuses a neighboring district of hoarding seeds.
This is real, and it's not the first time to understand why Rome's elite once bickered about leafy greens. You must understand Roman food, not the feasts of roasted peacocks and wine-soaked orgies, but the daily fare of ordinary citizens, and the symbolism that surrounded even the simplest meal. That the Romans took food seriously, not for flavor necessarily, but for philosophy. A citizen was expected to be moderate, self-controlled, and strong. Lettuce, or lactuca, was considered an ideal food. It grew quickly, required little effort, and didn't indulge the senses too much. It was the vegetable of restraint, but not all lettuce was created equal. Roman farmers cultivated several varieties: bitter leaf, soft leaf, curly stalk. Some were prized for their medicinal properties. Others were blamed for indigestion or sluggishness. The poet Ovid once described lettuce as cold to the blood, while Pliny the Elder noted it could ease the heat of temper. And so, debate bloomed. One camp in the Senate preferred wild lettuce, native to central Italy. It was crisp, bitter, and sturdy, a proper food for a disciplined republic. The other camp favored Egyptian lettuce, softer and larger, often served with oil or vinegar and eaten in the cooler. Months. The argument was not really about plants, it was about values. Supporters of the local variety believed Rome was slipping into softness. Foreign imports, they argued, were symbols of indulgence, creeping luxury, and moral decay. If the Senate allowed these foreign leaves to dominate the market, what message would it send to the youth? That softness was strength, that comfort was acceptable. You begin to see the layers. The lettuce is just a leaf, but the debate is about identity. Then the Senate, bound by tradition, takes identity very seriously. You sit beside a scribe who rolls his eyes and sharpens his stylus. This is the third time this month they've argued about garden policy. He whispers that one senator, Cato Minor, insists on planting his own lettuce just to avoid contributing to the public market. Another senator is rumored to eat only the soft leaves in secret, claiming his stomach can't handle the bitter ones anymore. The scribes keep detailed records. There is even a proposed Lalex Lacta career that would require state-run farms to grow a fixed percentage of native lettuce. It has little support, but its sponsor, a severe man in a faded toga, delivers a 3-hour speech on the agricultural decline of the Sabine Hills. He blames lettuce. You look around, no one laughs. This is not a farce. Rome, at this stage, is a growing empire, stretched across the Mediterranean. It imports everything: grain from Egypt, spices from the east, slaves from Gaul, and yet, here, in the heart of its government, a debate rages over a plant that grows in every alley. Why? Because the Roman mind saw the world in mirrors. A man who ate local lettuce was disciplined. A man who preferred foreign greens might as well be wearing silk. The debate reflected fear not of vegetables, but of change. At the far end of the chamber, a younger senator named Vez proposes a compromise. Allow Egyptian lettuce, but only in private households, not for public banquets or religious offerings. The room murmurs. This might work. You leave the chamber and walk through the city. The forum bustles with vendors. Among them, a wrinkled woman arranges leafy bunches on a wooden tray. You ask her which lettuce sells best. She shrugs. Depends on the cook. The soft ones are better with oil. She doesn't care about politics. She cares about dinner. But somewhere behind you, in a columned hall of senators and scribes, grown men in sandals still argue over a vegetable. Because in Rome, even a salad could be a stand-in for the soul of the republic. And you wonder, if a simple leaf could divide a senate, what other small things have steered the course of empires? You wake the next morning to the sound of a crier walking the streets, calling out the results of the Senate's latest meeting. No wars declared, no new tributes, but one decree, passed by a narrow vote: a temporary halt on Egyptian lettuce imports for public festivals. The people seem indifferent, but the crier repeats the announcement 3 times. As you walk through the Subura district, you notice something curious. Every garden patch, every clay pot along the windowsills, every backyard square seems to be growing the same thing. Lettuce, wild, wiry, bitter-tasting lettuce, the kind that resists pests and survives heat. It has long, stiff leaves and a sharp smell when crushed. This is the lettuce of the old Roman diet, unadorned, practical, almost medicinal, on homes across the city. Roman mothers chop it finely and mix it with vinegar, salt, and cumin. Some add fish brine or pickled onion. Others boil it into broth. It is never the centerpiece of the meal, only the frame, yet it carries weight. You enter a villa on the Esquiline Hill, where a family of minor officials sits to eat. The pater, Marcus Calvus, is proud of his backyard crop. He tells you he once served in the provinces and returned home sickened by the softness of foreign greens. Now every meal in his household begins with a plate of native lettuce. Even the slaves eat it. Discipline starts in the gut, he says. You ask his son, a teenage boy named Gaius, if he enjoys the taste. Gaius shrugs. It's food, he says, better than barley paste. But later in the courtyard he admits something else. When his tutor isn't looking, he sneaks off to the Egyptian quarter of the city, where foreign grocers still sell the soft, leafy kind. His favorite is served with crushed garlic and oil. He knows he shouldn't like it, but he does, and so the battle between leaves becomes a battle between generations in the markets. The debate is reflected in prices. Native lettuce is now being sold in bunches wrapped with ribbons bearing the wolf and eagle seal of the Senate. Foreign varieties are cheaper, but sold discreetly. Some stalls have started to label them as Syrian greens or coastal stalks to avoid attention. One merchant tells you a senator's servant once came at night to buy a basket of imported leaves, wrapped them in native outer leaves, and smuggled them into a banquet. No one noticed. The hypocrisy isn't new. Romans have always played both sides. Discipline in public, indulgence in private. Back in the forum, preparations are underway for a feast in honor of a minor deity of health. The menu, you hear, has been heavily edited by the Senate's Agricultural Committee. Only native vegetables, only native wheat. The cooks are grumbling. Egyptian lettuce wilts less in the heat and holds dressing better. But rules are rules. At the same time, satirical poems begin to circulate among the lower classes. One goes like this: senators, dressed in gold and pearls, debate which leaf best suits the world. One says bitter makes boys bold. The other says soft leaves suit the old. A few get arrested for distributing these verses, but most are ignored. The people find it amusing. The senators do. Not you spend an afternoon in the house of the Vestal Virgins, where a young priestess explains that even in their sacred rites, lettuce plays a role. It is eaten before fasts to cool the body, to prevent desire, but only the bitter kind. They believe it suppresses heat, both physical and emotional. You ask if it works. She just smiles. Even in military camps, food regulation becomes political. Soldiers are encouraged to grow native lettuce in pots and transport it dried. Field manuals praise its invigorating bitterness and warn against the languid habits associated with Egyptian strains. Whether this is science or superstition, no one seems certain, and yet, beyond the walls of Rome, the soft lettuce thrives. In Alexandria, in Carthage, in coastal Greece, the foreign variety is planted in rows. Roman traders eat it happily when traveling. Roman wives write home requesting seeds. Roman doctors import extracts for medicinal use, claiming it calms the nerves. You begin to realize that this debate is less about food and more about control. Controlling what goes into the body, what values are reinforced, what symbols are accepted. The lettuce is a leaf, but also a flag. By evening you sit with a group of scribes who have just returned from the Senate. They're laughing quietly. Today, a senator proposed that all military generals be required to consume native lettuce before giving public addresses. The motion was shelved, but not rejected outright. And you wonder that if food reflects the soul of a nation, what does it say when that nation begins to fear its own salad? The days grow hotter. Summer presses against the walls of Rome, and with the heat comes the wilted silence of tired politics. The Senate continues to meet, but attendance is thinner. The gardens suffer. The price of lettuce, both native and imported, rises. And still, the arguments continue. You are seated once again in the Curia Hostilia. The chamber is buzzing with murmured updates from Gaul, grumblings about grain shortages, and the usual backroom alliances. But
the formal session opens with a matter both urgent and ridiculous. A dispute over the use of foreign lettuce at a recent triumphal feast. The feast was for a minor military victory. The general, a well-connected man from Campania, ordered a lavish banquet. Roasted boar, honeyed dates, almond pastries, and 3 dishes that, to the dismay of several senators, featured Egyptian lettuce, soft, buttery, seasoned with imported vinegar. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it becomes a scandal. A senator from the conservative faction stands, finger raised, and declares that the general has fed weakness to the republic. Another counters that the general merely reflected the variety of Rome's holdings. That soft lettuce is now grown in Roman colonies, and therefore no longer foreign. The debate lasts for hours. Outside the chamber, the people of Rome go on eating whatever lettuce they can afford. Market vendors joke that soon the Senate will tax vinegar or standardize salad recipes. A stonecutter near the Aventine carves a sign with a mock crest. 2 crossed heads of lettuce beneath the motto virtues, et vinegar. Satirists write new poems. One line reads, "Rome once conquered Carthage, now it cannot conquer lunch." Behind the laughter, however, is real tension. You visit the villa of an aging senator who remembers the days before foreign trade flooded the city. He sits in his garden, plucking bitter leaves from a trough and chewing them slowly. The problem, he says, is not the lettuce. It is forgetting why we ever cared. He tells you how, in his youth, meals were simple: bread, olives, beans, a bit of cheese. Lettuce was served not for taste, but for purpose, to cool the body, to prepare the mind for duty. A plate of rough greens before a long speech was tradition, not pleasure. Discipline began at the table. But now, he says, taste is king. Young men prefer softness, luxury, oil instead of vinegar, silk instead of wool. Lettuce is just the beginning. You ask if he truly believes the Republic is at risk from salad. He chuckles, but then falls silent. Not from lettuce, he says. From the fact that we'd rather argue about it than anything else. That evening, at a dinner hosted by a wealthy merchant, you were served a salad of mixed leaves, bitter and soft, native and imported. No one mentions politics. The dish is simply good. The oil is light, the dressing gentle. Conversation turns to shipping routes and poetry. The merchant leans over and says quietly, "They fight about lettuce because they're too scared to fight about land, or war, or slaves. Leaves are safer. You realize he's right. By now, the Senate has drafted a new compromise, a salvia accord. Public feasts must feature at least 50% native-grown lettuce. Religious events may only use locally certified strains. Imports are still allowed for private consumption, but taxed at a higher rate. It is bureaucracy applied to vegetables, but it passes. A marble tablet is inscribed and posted near the forum. The text is detailed. Weight limits, classification codes, maximum vinegar ratios. A set of guidelines so exact that no cook could possibly remember them all. In response, cooks do what they always do. They nod, smile, and continue as they like. You walk through the city's alleys one last time. A boy picks soft lettuce from a garden wall and eats it raw. A grocer sprinkles water over both native and foreign leaves, selling them side by side. A priestess buys the bitter kind for her temple, but slips a handful of the soft ones into her sleeve. No one really stops the flow, because underneath the laws and the speeches and the tablets, the people are still hungry. And you realize something important. The Senate may debate vegetables as symbols of strength, but the people eat what they need, what grows, what tastes good. Politics can fight over what food means, but food, in the end, feeds. The Republic will fall, but not because of lettuce. Still, somewhere in the records of Rome, etched in wax and marble, is a trail of arguments over leaves, a reminder that even the most powerful governments can spend their strength on symbolism while missing the hunger beneath. You sit quietly in the warm dusk of a public garden. Children run between the hedges. A woman waters a row of greens. You reach down and pluck a leaf yourself. It is soft, faintly sweet, and you wonder if the smallest debates reflect the greatest fears of an age. What forgotten arguments in our own time might reveal who we truly were? Chapter 5. The life and times of a medieval ditch-diggeri. Wake to the sound of a wooden bell ringing from the village center. The sun hasn't yet cleared the treetops, but already the air smells like damp straw, smoke, and wet wool. Your hands are sore, your back aches from yesterday's work, and your boots are still caked with yesterday's mud. You are a ditch digger in a 13th century English village. No one knows your name beyond the fields. You won't be written into the abbey's scrolls or mentioned in the Lord's records, unless you run away or die in someone else's trench. But without your work, the village would drown. You rise from your straw mat, shake off the fleas, and stretch your arms. Outside, the fields are shrouded in early mist. Your tools lean against the wall, a wooden shovel, an iron-edged spade, and a short-handled mattock for chopping roots. The handles are smooth from use. The metal has been mended twice. Today's job is the same as yesterday's, and likely tomorrow's. Move the earth, shape the land, control the water. The job is not just about digging. It's about watching the sky, feeling the ground under your boots, and knowing where the water wants to go. It's also about listening to the reeve who assigns your lot, to the gossip that runs faster than news, and to the land itself. Your name is Wulfric, and you have been digging since you were 12. You walk past rows of low, smoky huts with thatched roofs, their walls smeared with wattle and daub. Chickens struck beneath the eaves. Pigs grunt from a fenced enclosure. Someone sneezes loudly from within a house and curses the fog dot at the edge of the village. Lies your worksite, a half-finished ditch meant to guide runoff from the northern fields into the old drainage channel near the Abbey Mill. It's simple enough in theory. In practice, it is a war with the elements. Your boots squelch into the muck as you begin. The earth here is rich and black but heavy. Clay beneath the topsoil turns to a sticky paste when wet and to stone when dry. It clings to the shovel. It clogs the spade. You work slowly, rhythmically, clearing one small section at a time. Another laborer, Gotrek, joins you. You nod to each other, but say little. Conversation wastes breath. You both know the rhythm. The work is hard, but it matters. Ditches guide water from the barley fields in spring, drain flooded roads after autumn rains, and keep the village lanes from turning into bogs. A well-cut ditch might last years. A poorly made one could fail overnight, flooding someone's hut or soaking the granary floor in this village. Ditches mark everything. Boundaries between plots, paths to the river, edges of grazing land. They're not just holes in the ground. They are the infrastructure of the medieval world. The lord of the manor doesn't dig them, of course. He gives orders, collects rents, and occasionally rides past on a horse without mud on his boots. The monks from the abbey give advice, sometimes even draw little maps on scraps of vellum. But it's people like you who shape the earth. You stop to stretch your back and sip weak ale from a leather flask. The drink is warm and flat, but it keeps your belly quiet. Nearby, a boy walks past with a basket of rushes for thatching. He asks what you're doing. You say, teaching the water where to go. He laughs and runs off, but the truth of it stays with you, because that's what this job is. You're not moving dirt. You're persuading the earth to behave. You're guiding the flow of the land so others can plant, walk, and sleep without fear of rising water. You look back at the ditch. It's slow work. It always is. But you remember the winter 5 years ago when the drainage failed. Half the village flooded. The fields near the chapel turned to swamp. The pigs nearly drowned. The priest said it was God's punishment for drinking too much during St. Bede's feast. You knew it was just a blocked ditch. After that, people paid more attention. They still don't thank you, but they complain less. You keep digging. By midday, your arms are sore, and your back feels like it's been stepped on by an ox. You pause, only long enough to chew on some barley bread and a chunk of salty cheese. Godric mutters that the reeve wants the ditch finished before Michaelmas. That's 4 days from now. You'll need help. You don't ask for it. Help is not often offered freely, but if others are assigned to your line, the work will go faster. The soil changes halfway down the trench. The color lightens. Gravel shows beneath the clay. This means you're nearing the old Roman ditch, the one no one talks about but everyone knows is there. A line of ancient stone hidden beneath layers of time. The Romans built ditches too, and roads, and drains, and baths. You've never seen a bathhouse, but you've heard of them. Warm water flowing from stone lions, heated floors, strange ideas. You chip carefully near the edge of the gravel and find a shard of worn pottery. Smooth, orange, not like the local wares. You wipe it off and place it in your pouch. The steward at the abbey collects them. Sometimes he gives you a piece of bread in exchange. The ditch deepens. The rhythm returns. And as you work, you begin to see the shape of the village in your mind. Not just the huts and lanes, but the hidden lines, the paths of water, the rise of ground, the weight of stone beneath soil. You know where it will flood after a storm. You know where the frost lingers longest. You know which plots need new trenches next spring. No one elected you to this role. No one calls you an engineer, but you are one. At dusk, the bell rings again. You wipe your hands and step out of the trench. Your boots are heavier now, but your work is visible. A shallow channel runs straight and true toward the old line of the Roman ditch. You smile slightly. It's enough for today. As you walk home, past the smoke and sheep and the voices rising from the alehouse, you wonder how many hands before yours have shaped the ground. How many diggers have passed, nameless, into the soil they moved. And you ask yourself, if the builders of a village are never remembered, how much of history has rested quietly on shoulders no one thought to name? The next morning brings a chill wind and the distant promise of rain. The sky is smeared with grey, and the air smells like wet iron. You rise early, because when it rains, ditches matter more than ever. Wulfric shoulders his spade and joins Godric near the trench. The ground is damp, but not yet soaked, a rare window of time when digging is easiest. The clay softens just enough, but hasn't yet become soup. You work quickly, clearing the trench wall, deepening the line by a hand's width. By midday the clouds have thickened, and the reeve arrives. He is a stern man with a limp and a thin voice that cuts through the wind. He doesn't dig, but he watches everything. He knows whose trench is falling behind and who works slowly when backs are turned. He nods at your progress and says nothing. That is high praise. He leaves you with a warning. Storms are coming. If the ditch is not ready, the eastern field planted late with turnips will flood. That means no yield. That means fines, and fines mean hunger. You dig faster in the nearby fields. Women are harvesting onions and cabbages. Children chase chickens between rows of stalks. A piglet has escaped and is snorting near your trench. You wave it away. This is not dramatic work, no battles, no sermons, but it is vital. One misaligned ditch can ruin a season's work. One collapsed wall can turn good earth into swamp. As you shovel, your thoughts drift. You remember your father, also a ditch digger. He worked the lands near Winchester. He used to say that the best ditches were the ones no one noticed. If it works, he said, they forget who dug it. If it fails, they remember your name with curses. You have lived with that truth ever since. You've learned to read the soil, the way it splits under frost, the way a certain kind of weed signals poor drainage, the way moles tunnel near dry ground. These signs matter more than any decree or tithe list. Your hands have grown thick and rough. Your back aches every morning. But you know the land in a way the steward never will. As the rain begins to fall, you brace the sides of the trench with old brush. Not to stop water, but to slow it. Let it trickle instead of rush. You shape the ditch into a curve near the base. Of a Ryzan instinct passed down, not written. Godric speaks up as thunder rolls. He remembers a time when a ditch near the chapel failed and the graveyard flooded. Bones surfaced. They had to rebury the priest's wife. No one talked about it afterward, just fixed a trench and built a new stone marker. You both go silent after that. The rain thickens. The water begins to pool at the trench bottom. You widen a channel, letting it flow. Mud cakes your legs, but the ditch holds. The line is steady. The gradient just right. You look over your shoulder. A younger boy from the village, maybe 13, is watching you from behind a fence post. He's holding a thin stick, copying your movements. His boots are too big, his eyes too wide. You wave him over. He hesitates, then steps into the field. You hand him the spade. It nearly tips him forward. He laughs. You show him how to cut the wall cleanly, how to angle the blade, how to use the mattock to loosen clay before scooping. It is slow, clumsy work, but he learns. In time, he will know the weight of earth the way you do. He will feel it in his bones. He will shape this land too. You don't ask his name. He doesn't ask yours. At night, back in your hut, the rain drums softly on the thatch. You sit by the small fire, mending the handle of your spade with a length of cord. Outside, the ditch is working. You know it without looking. Water moves. Always moves. The job is to guide it without forcing it, to dig where it wants to go, to offer paths instead of dams. You think again about the old Roman ditch buried beneath your village. The stonework was neat, precise, ancient. No one remembers. Who built it? No one knows their names. But the ditch still holds when the newer ones crack. That is a kind of immortality, not carved in stone, but carved in function. A ditch that survives centuries. A line of earth that outlasts kingdoms. You lean back and stretch your sore arms. The boy will return tomorrow, or he won't. Either way, the land will still need shaping. The water will still need guiding. And you ask yourself, if the work that matters most is buried out of sight, how many legacies have flowed quietly beneath our feet, shaping the world without a word? The storm has passed. The sky clears with a pale, cloud-streaked light, and the fields shimmer with wetness. The ditch you dug still runs clean, a narrow stream of brown water flowing just as it should, edging around the turnip plots, away from the chapel's steps, and into the low canal by the mill road. You stand beside it, arms crossed, boots planted in mud. The boy is back today, grinning at his own crooked trench extension. You nod approval and silently fix his gradient. The water needs a little more coaxing to follow his line. He watches you adjust it and nods, not with shame, but with quiet respect. The reeve arrives. He surveys the ditch with hands behind his back, mumbling about last year's washout and how this year will be better. He doesn't praise you directly, but his tone lacks complaint. That, in your world, is high honor. You walk the length of the trench, tapping the walls with your spade. You listen for the dull thump of trapped air, the soft crumble of erosion. The ditch is alive in its way. It must be read like a book, listened to like a story told in flowing lines. Nearby, the abbey bells ring. It's the feast of Saint Cyprian. The village gathers for bread, broth, and hymns. You're not required to attend, but you walk to the edge of the crowd, standing in the back, spade still in hand, boots still muddy. You hear the priest speak of order, of balance, of tending what we've been given. He speaks in parables about vines and vineyards, but your mind drifts to ditches and rain. Order isn't about laws, it's about flow. You remember once being asked to dig a trench through a new sheep pasture. The soil was rocky and the incline wrong. You tried to explain this to the steward, but he insisted. So you dug. Within 2 days, the trench had collapsed, the water pooled, and 2 sheep were stuck in mud up to their bellies. After that, the steward listened more carefully. Sometimes you think the land teaches better than people do. The boy trails after you in the afternoon as you reinforce the sides with woven reeds. These help prevent erosion and guide the water around bends. You show him how to layer turf slabs, green side down, so they knit into the walls. In a week, the roots will hold the bank together. A trick taught to you by a digger, long dead, whose name you never learned. The boy asks why you don't write these things down. You shrug. Ditches don't read. But really, you know the truth. This knowledge only lives in practice. A ditch on parchment is just a line. A ditch in the earth is a force shaping lives, saving crops, marking borders. You remember the great frost 3 winters ago, when every house had frozen pots and the water in the chapel well turned to ice. The only fresh water for 2 days came from a shallow trench near the southern field yours. It had never frozen, thanks to its depth and curve. Mothers carried pails from it like a holy spring. No one said thank you. They just came. That ditch still flows today. You take pride in things that no one else remembers. The boy asks what happens when you grow old and can't dig anymore. You look down at your hands, at the scabs and calluses. You say, then I show others where to dig. He asks if you'll teach him everything. You say, only if you ask the right questions. At sunset, you walk to the edge of the marshland where an old Roman ditch intersects your newest cut. The stones are worn, but still aligned. You trace them with your hand. Moss grows between them, but the water still runs. You stand in silence. The boy waits. Finally you say, this was dug before your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was born, and still it flows. He stares. You add, a ditch, dug right, lasts longer than a memory. That night, you patched your boots with waxed thread and sit by the fire. The spade leans against the door. The rain may return, or not. But the earth will always need shaping. And so tomorrow, you will dig again, because the fields depend on it, because the houses sleep easier when water obeys, because ditches never make you famous, but they make the world possible. You lie down, close your eyes, and listen. Outside, beyond the hut, the ditch runs softly, the sound of quiet success, and you wonder if the world is truly shaped by grand deeds or by countless small ones, passed silently through calloused hands, one clean trench at a time. Chapter 6. How Islamic scholars preserved cheese for desert travel. The sun rises over the golden dunes of North Africa. The light is already sharp, painting the sand with endless ripples and waves. In the distance, a caravan of camels crests a ridge, their legs steady, their riders wrapped in white and blue cloth to block the wind and heat. You were riding with them through the Sahel in the late 10th century. This is the age of scholars and caravans, of leather-bound manuscripts and salt blocks strapped to camelbacks, and tucked inside one of those saddlebags, wrapped in layers of waxed linen, is something that should not exist in this climate: cheese. Not soft, fresh cheese that spoils in a day. Not oily goat curd that melts into nothing. This cheese is hard, dry, and clean. It smells faintly of smoke and desert herbs. It cracks instead of crumbles, and it lasts weeks, even months beneath the unforgiving sun. The riders call it cash or Ica, depending on where they come from. In some cities, it's known as Jubban al-Musafar traveler's cheese. It is not sold in markets. It is made, traded, and consumed only by those who move between cities and outposts, where food must survive both time and heat. You ask where it comes from. The man riding beside you, an older merchant named Altahir, smiles and gestures to a bundle tied behind his saddle. From knowledge, he says, and he means it, because this cheese is not a peasant's guesswork or a herdsman's leftover. It is a product of deliberate science, developed in the kitchens, courts, and study halls of the Islamic Golden Age. As the caravan winds toward the oasis town of Tamantat, Altahir tells you the story. Centuries earlier, in the markets of Baghdad and Damascus, scholars were asking new questions, not just about stars and medicine, but about food, preservation, shelf life, nutritional balance. How do you carry nourishment across the sands without spoilage? How do you keep milk from rotting when the nearest shade is 3 days away? Cheese, of course, was already known. The ancient Greeks and Romans made it. Bedouins churned goat milk into clumps, but most cheeses failed the desert test. They spoiled, melted, or attracted flies, so scholars experimented in one treatise. A scholar described mixing curds with salt, shaping them into balls, then drying them under a canopy of date palms, protected from direct sun but exposed to dry air. Others suggested smoking the curds over low burning olive pits or adding powdered fenugreek and thyme for both flavor and preservation. The result, a cheese that hardened like chalk, absorbed almost no moisture, and could be carried wrapped in cloth through desert heat without spoiling. Altair unwraps a small block and breaks off a piece. You chew it slowly. It is dry but not bland, faintly sharp. The flavor blooms as you chew. It dissolves into something warm, savory, and faintly herbal. It fills your stomach, and more importantly, it sticks. You eat one piece, he says, and you don't need another until dusk. In desert travel, that matters. Space is limited. Water is precious. Food must be dense, stable, and light. The cheese fits all three. And it's not just fuel, it's data. In Timbuktu, in Fustat, in Nishapa, scholars catalogued not only the making of cheese, but the precise conditions required to store it. One manuscript lists ideal humidity levels for different preservation techniques. Another suggests layering the cheese with crushed mint to prevent worms. In Cordoba, a physician wrote that dried cheese helped cool the stomach and treat minor thirst when eaten slowly. Al-Tahir tells you of one famous traveler, Ibn Battuta, who once wrote of being offered cheese in the desert and thinking it was stone until it softened on his tongue. The man who gave it to him claimed his grandfather had learned the technique from a scholar near Bukhara. Cheese had become portable wisdom at the oasis. Women carry baskets of dates and dried cheese to the shade. Children play near the water. A scholar sits cross-legged, reading aloud from a scroll. Altair offers him a piece of cheese, and the man accepts it as though it were bread. You watch as he eats and writes. You notice how the cheese doesn't melt, doesn't stain his fingers, doesn't leave crumbs. It is designed for this, and you realize this isn't just food. It's survival, made possible by thought. The Islamic world of this time is vast, stretching from Spain to India. Ideas travel faster than armies, and among the ideas carried by traders and scholars are recipes, formulas, and field-tested methods like this one. No one remembers the name of the first person to dry curds under a canopy in the desert, but their method, refined by scholars and shepherds alike, has become a quiet cornerstone of caravan life. You step away from the camp, the sun high now, and the dunes glowing gold. You break off another piece of cheese and chew slowly, watching as the caravan prepares to move again, and you wonder if knowledge can preserve something as fragile as milk in a burning desert. What other simple ideas have quietly carried civilizations across the sands of history? The next leg of the journey takes you deeper into the desert, following a route carved not by armies but by trade. The camels move with slow certainty, their feet sinking softly into sand that was once seafloor. You pass dry wells, forgotten shrines, and the faint outlines of caravans that came before, paths etched by repetition. And still, in every saddlebag, a few wrapped bundles of preserved cheese travel with you. As the caravan stops to rest beneath the shade of acacia trees, Altair sits down and spreads a small cloth. He unwraps a flat slab of hard cheese, aged to a deep ochre. This one, he says, came from the kitchens of Fez. He bought it from a man whose family had made it for 4 generations. It was pressed under smooth stones and stored in clay jars packed with fine sand and salt. Preservation, he explains, is not just chemistry, it is architecture. In cities like Baghdad and Aleppo, food preservation was considered a science worthy of record. The Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom in Baghdad, once employed not only astronomers and mathematicians, but also cooks and food theorists. Some wrote treatises on methods of drying fruit and meat. Others investigated the use of saltpeter, ash, or smoke. You may think of food as something fleeting, consumed and forgotten. But in the medieval Islamic world, food was date-observed, categorized, tested, and improved. In one surviving manuscript, a scholar describes the proper order of steps for making desert cheese. Boil fresh goat or camel milk, skimming until clear. Add rennet or fig sap to curdle. Drain the curds in linen sacks, mix with a ratio of crushed rock salt and dried herbs.
Press under stone slabs for 2 days. Dry in the shade. Suspended in mesh sacks above smoking coals. Store in terracotta. Sealed with wax or linen dipped in olive oil. Each step was tied to an observation. Heat ruins the curd, but smoke prevents insects. Salt draws out water, but too much makes it bitter. Clay jars breathe. Metal traps heat. Everything had purpose. You watch as Altahir carefully offers a piece to the caravan leader, who accepts it and grins. They've done this dozens of times. The cheese is a kind of contractor shared understanding that this journey will not fail for lack of food. Nearby, a camel wrangler tells you of another use for the cheese. Currency. In some outposts, a tightly wrapped bundle of aged cheese could be traded for rope, water, or a night's shelter. Its value came not from rarity, but reliability. It did not spoil. It did not attract pests. It nourished without ceremony. At the next oasis town, a cluster of stone dwellings and shade tents you. Meet a merchant who stores his cheese in an underground room cut into the rock. He invites you in. The chamber is cool, lined with clay jars marked with wax seals. Some are labeled in Kufic script, others bear family crests or the names of cities. Tunis, Damascus, Samarkand. Each jar holds a variation of the same recipe for climate, culture, or livestock. Some cheeses are blended with ground chickpeas to stretch the curd. Others are rolled in crushed dates or cumin. One jar contains a cheese soaked in vinegar and then re-dried, creating a tangy hardness that cracks like bark. He hands you a small wedge, chalky and pale. It breaks apart into flakes. You chew it slowly and taste something both ancient and exact. Back outside, a boy is loading camels with baskets of onions and tightly sealed cheese jars. His father oversees the loading. He explains that some jars are bound for the southern routes across the Sahara to Gao and Timbuktu. Others will go north to Sigil Massa and then toward Marrakesh. He is sending food not just to customers, but to ideas, to scholars, travelers, and trading posts where knowledge and cheese are exchanged together. Because by now, the cheese has become more than food. It's a link. In libraries from Al-Andalus to Khorasan, scholars who read Avicenna's Canon of Medicine and Al-Khwarizmi's Book of Calculation also kept copies of anonymous manuals on storing cheese in linen soaked with vinegar or packing it in dry rose petals. These books were often tucked between works on astronomy and navigation. In their world, knowing how to preserve food was not beneath intellectual dignity. It was part of survival. At the oasis, you watch as a scholar carefully catalogs a new shipment. He removes one jar, weighs it, checks for mold, scribbles a note on palm leaf parchment, then places it into a crate with soft wool padding. He isn't storing treasure, he's storing trust. Because when a camel caravan arrives, hungry and parched, these bundles must open and reveal something edible, something strong, something right. And you think of how much this tiny, chalky food has traveled. From mountaintop farms where goats graze among fig trees, to desert markets loud with voices in 5 languages, to saddlebags carried across endless wind. This cheese is not just fuel, it is proof that minds and hands, across centuries, refuse to be defeated by heat, time, or distance. That's the sun sets and the campfire is lit. Altahir unwraps the last of his cheese for the evening meal. Dates, flatbread tea, and thin slices of cheese passed around in silence. It isn't a feast, but no one goes to sleep hungry, and you wondered if knowledge, when preserved well, can last across lifetimes. Deserts and forgotten roads. What other forms of wisdom have we overlooked? In cloth, waiting to be opened. The stars are sharp tonight, the kind of sky you only see far from cities, where the air is dry and the wind never rests. Around the campfire, the caravan sleeps in rows like spokes around the flames. Somewhere among the saddlebags and straw mats, a few small bundles of cheese are wrapped, sealed, and untouched. They are waiting, like pages in a book. You sit with Altair again. He's older than he looks, with a voice that always sounds like he's on the edge of finishing a story. Tonight he tells you about a scholar he met in Buzra, a quiet man who studied heat, not for war, but for food. This scholar wrote that time and temperature were languages. If you listened carefully, they told you how to preserve anything. Cheese, he said, was not just made of milk. It was shaped by patience, salt, and discipline. You'll realize that the cheese you've been eating all these days is a product not of luck, but of systematic thought. Every method, salting, drying, smoking, storing, was observed, tested, adjusted, and shared. It was not superstition. It was experiment. And it worked. Because here you are, far from any green pasture, chewing on something made weeks ago, in a different city, under different stars. And it still feeds you. That is survival by design. In the morning, the caravan reaches a modest city, Segilmaza, once a node in the trans-Saharan trade. Its walls are low, built of mud, brick, and stone, and its streets are quiet except for the bustle of traders unloading salt, cloth, and copper. In the market square, you see something remarkable: a stall selling aged cheese, cut into tiles and wrapped in stamped linen. The seller explains each type by region: cheese from Kawang, from Karawan, from the Atlas foothills. He tells customers which ones hold best in clay jars, which dissolve better in broth, which blend with dried apricot for the sick. His knowledge is half medical, half culinary. A scribe stands nearby, noting how long each type lasts in heat. He is keeping a chart, comparing spoilage by weight and region. You ask why, he shrugs. So the next merchant knows more than I do. That is how the knowledge continues, not with grand books or marble monuments, but with quiet continuity. In the years to come, empires will rise and fall, libraries will burn, roads will vanish into sand. But some of these techniques will survive in kitchens and nomad camps, passed down by repetition. You think of a girl learning from her grandmother how to wrap cheese in leaves, a herder testing a new salting ratio, a cook hanging curd over a smoky fire, not knowing he's following the same steps used in Baghdad 5 centuries earlier. And the cheese itself survives in small ways in a Turkish village where kekalik is dried on linen in the sun, in an Iranian kitchen where kashk is rehydrated into a tangy soup, in North African recipes where aged curd is shaved into flatbread, fragments of a forgotten science, carried forward by hands that may never read the books but still remember the touch of good curd. Altair finishes his meal and wraps the last piece of his traveler's cheese in fresh cloth. He places it back into the saddlebag. As carefully as a scroll, you realize something. Preserving cheese was never only about hunger. It was about trusting knowledge over chaos, about knowing that even in harshness something could last. Something could be made to endure. That as the caravan prepares to depart again, you listen to the rustling of ropes, the clicks of camel hooves, and the low murmur of morning prayers. In the heart of the desert, one block of cheese can be more than food. It can be a promise that someone, long ago, thought carefully enough to make your survival easier today. And you ask yourself, if the wisdom that feeds us is wrapped in the humblest things, what other truths have we tasted without ever knowing who first cooked them?